This is In Studio. I'm Jay Daniels. Our guest this week is Danny Bacher. He's a critically acclaimed vocalist who recently released the album Still Happy. Danny was also this year's recipient of the American Songbook Association's Margaret Whiting Award. Recently, I had the pleasure of visiting Danny at his home in northern New Jersey. We talked about a lot of things, from the emotional impact of music to his extensive collection of Laurel and Hardy memorabilia to his talents as a saxophonist.
And my main one being the often looked over and misunderstood soprano saxophone. And I admit it proudly that I play that with great joy. And give me some more adjectives here.
Jubilation.
That's it. Is that an adjective?
With great excitement, with great enthusiasm.
There you go. Those are all very good.
You know, one time I heard the soprano sax, one of the very few times I've heard it, was with John Coltrane playing Afro Blue.
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
And there are not many recordings with soprano sax, so...
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, if we may.
We may.
Because I want to go into some of the people who I find influential on just soprano. Coltrane not being one of them, and I'll say this with all due respect to the late great John Coltrane, who I respect, tremendous respect for him and adoration for his music. I'm just speaking specifically about the soprano saxophone, and it comes down to tone. He was going for a certain thing, and I think he achieved what he was probably looking for with his tone. My favorite things being a very popular recording of his soprano playing. But tone-wise, for me, I feel that the greatest soprano tones out there, people that really played with like a beautiful sound, and I think you have to start with Sidney Bechet, and even though he had a very wide vibrato, he really played with such power. And there was something enchanting about his tone. But Zoot Sims... right? Zoot Sims and Lucky Thompson had, to me, the most beautiful, lush sounds on the soprano saxophone and really changed the game for that instrument. Because, I joke around saying it's overlooked or misunderstood. People say it's the ugly stepchild of the saxophone family, But
most people prefer the tenor or the alto.
Sure,
right?
Sure they do. And, and even Johnny Hodges, who had one of the most beautiful sounds on alto saxophone, one of the great influencers on tone and sound for me as I grew up and listened to different horn players. But even his soprano playing, which he did play on the recording of that famous 1938 Carnegie Hall concert, you can hear Hodges playing soprano on a couple of tracks. And I was so excited to hear that. And when I learned that he was on there, I thought, oh, great, because Hodges, what a tone. But unfortunately, his soprano tone didn't do it for me like his alto tone does. It's almost like an alto. You think of Paul Desmond or Hodges or
What about Stan Getz?
Well, Stan Getz, on tenor, of course, beautiful tone. Stan Getz is certainly an influence on me. Ben Webster, Lester Young was one of the great improvisers in jazz. One of the great jazz players, and I think he influences people that have any sense and want to listen to really great players that were game changers. I think you have to start with Lester Young. He kind of starts where other people leave off, in my opinion. But Ben Webster for sound, Stan Getz, Zoot Sims. But Zoot could transfer what he did on tenor to the soprano. And I think because I played alto and tenor, and even Barry for so many years, that I approached the soprano kind of as a tenor guy. And the embouchure is not this, typical what you really should be doing with that instrument. I play with a looser embouchure, but I think that helps give that kind of lush tone that I strive for. So, yeah, that kind of goes into, in maybe too much detail, my approach to the soprano saxophone.
Would you say that you share some of those same lush qualities that you try to invoke with the saxophone? Do you also try to bring those out with your vocal technique as well?
Well, I think it's interesting you asked that. A lot of people say that when you have a singer that's an instrumentalist, you often try to find the connection of the artist as a singer and what they're bringing from their instrument and to their instrument, and what connects the singing to the playing to the singing. And I feel that the soprano works so well with my voice style. And a lot of critics have said this, and a lot of people, just fans or people that come to shows, and they say, oh, we really like how that saxophone in particular complements your singing style. And that's a bigger compliment than I think people realize to someone like me, because it's I don't even know if it's subconscious. When you play and sing for as long as I've been doing this, it almost has to inform the other. One has to inform the other, and it's just nice when that gets reiterated or spoken by someone that's seeing you for the first time, or someone that likes what you do. Yeah. So it's very nice. It's a compliment of the highest order.
And music and art, specifically the classics, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s.
Okay, I thought you meant like the 1700s when you say the classics.
Personal, yeah, things
right,
like that.
Right.
But no, I'm talking about popular music, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s.
Sure, yeah.
And coming into your home here in northern New Jersey, there is art all throughout your home, whether it's paintings, whether it's masks, books, an extensive Laurel and Hardy collection.
That's right.
I mean, you're probably one of the foremost experts on the subject of Stan Laurel and Oliver Hardy.
Yeah.
But all of that comes together as part of who you are.
Yeah.
And the way that you express it, I think, is through your music.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny you mentioned that, because I do feel that a lot of times a home is a reflection on a person's personality, or many facets of their personalities. And my wife and I, at least for us, in decorating and how to design, that was kind of what we were going for. It's like, let's find things that really show our expression of who we are. And being that my wife's in the theatrical arts, and we met actually doing a national tour years ago of a show, and that's how we met, on the road, fell in love, and the rest is history here. But basically, I think that you see so much in connection with a certain era or a certain time that really interests me, whether it be something in the magic world, or the theatrical world, or the film world, or the music world. You see that this is somebody that's living here is surprising to find out how old I am. Because if you were probably to get a key and just come into my place before knowing me, you'd say, oh, what a lovely home for a 90-year-old man.
And it turns out you're only.
What's that?
It turns out that you're only.
What, my age?
Yes.
A lady never reveals her age. I'm kidding. Well, if you must know it, I'm 41 and a half. Kids like to say those. They like to do the half age. We go backwards. Once you hit 40, you say, I just turned 41 recently in January.
And we're recording this in July. So
that's right.
My 31st is on August the 3rd.
31st?
Mm-hmm.
Get out of here. You see, these old souls that you and I are, you would swear you're talking to, having tea with, two old biddies or something.
I walk into a room, Danny, you can smell the mothballs coming.
I did. I was wondering what that was, and now you... Thank you. All right.
So, you are obviously an old soul. You're very attracted to a lot of the art of yesteryear.
Yeah.
So...
God, because it's so good, Jay,
I was going to ask, what is the draw for you?
I think it's because I'm into things of high quality. I like the finer things in life, and unfortunately, and I hate to say this, I sound like, I'm lambasting anything after 1950, and I'm not. There are certainly things to this day that are being produced that are at a high level, but just the amount of quantity of quality from that era, it's really hard to not keep going back, trying to go back to that same well, because it's just there's such a font of beauty. It's like the lyrics were gorgeous. It was poetry. It was heartfelt. It had a positive spin to it so many times. It was about uplifting the spirit. And the music is lush and beautiful. Well before I was into lyrics, and I was a player for many years before I started singing.
Yeah.
I was a saxophonist, so I always listened for melody, and there was something about melodies of someone like Duke Ellington or melody of someone by like Billy Strayhorn, or by people like, Richard Rodgers, by people like George Gershwin, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter. Those are the things that like I could really relate to, and at a very young age. I got turned on at a young age to this era of culture. It wasn't just the music. It was the movies. It was the writing, the general pop culture and culture of that era really just piqued my interest at such a young age. So I kind of got into this devouring mode, and I couldn't get enough of it. I'd seek things out, and if I didn't know about it, I'd sort of zealously approach learning about it, and yeah, it was like a diet, a diet of all this wonderful culture from an era. And I feel that when you get steeped in something, it becomes part of your being, and it's very hard to take that away from you when it becomes part of you. And I feel very blessed, because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people my age growing up, and not that there wasn't great music, and as I've gotten older, my horizons have broadened to the fact where it's like I love a lot of classic rock, like the Stones, like the Beatles, listen to a lot of that music, and the music of my parents' generation. But it was really my grandparents' generation that I feel the most at home with, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Of course it makes sense to you.
well, that's because I too shared in a lot of that. I didn't grow up with jazz in my house growing up, but there were always elements of this older music, or classic music, as I like to call it. I don't like to use the word old and new, because it unintentionally applies age to it, as though it's no longer relevant.
Well, it's in your radio station. It's timeless, really.
That's right. So there were always elements like, Johnny Costa on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, or the Our Gang comedies, which you and I share a great love of, the Hal Roach Our Gang series.
Oh, yeah. The music made such a part of that.
You remember Alfalfa, who never could sing, but I remember one of the very first times I saw Alfalfa. It was the Pinch Singer, which was almost like a folly. And the gang is wanting to go participate in this radio contest to win $50 to get new football suits for everyone.
Yeah.
So the gang is trying to find someone to sing. They eventually settle on Darla. Darla is late to the contest, and guess who the Pinch Singer is? Alfalfa.
Right.
But he sings, "I'm in the mood for love." Not like that. But
because you're near me.
Yeah. But when I would hear those songs, it was there was nothing really fancy or memorable about the orchestral arrangement in that particular short. But I heard the melody and I heard the lyric. And Danny, I do listen to some of the new stuff. At least I'll try to be halfway relevant when people say, "Have you heard the latest by so-and-so?" I want to say, yes, I have. Yeah. I was thinking the other day, though, about song lyrics especially. And this leads, and I think, to our main portion of the conversation. There is a lot of repetition in modern music. And that's nothing new. That's what the chorus is there for, something repetitive that you can grab a hold of. But I don't know about you, Danny, but it just seems to me that so many of the lyrics, and these are from 18, 19, 20-year-olds, the lyrics are very dark. Talking about how, people have been hurting each other for years, but to hear these songs about how bad and how dark life is, and these people have just gotten started, I don't think we should push aside the cares, but is it just me, or has music gotten darker?
We go through periods, I'm a child of the 80s, right? And the 90s.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because when you think of the 80s, I think of a lot of upbeat music. You think of
the
a
new
lot.
wave, yeah.
Yeah, and so many groups, even Cyndi Lauper, it was upbeat stuff. There was that feeling of escapism in the music. People like David Byrne, who very interesting and kind of like avant-garde in a sense, but for the most part, there was a lot of upbeat aspects to 80s music, right?
Yeah.
It was fun music. You get into the 90s, and you get into this like angsty kind of grunge thing, and it gets so it's like I feel generations or certain times go through waves, and we're at a very dark place right now. But you look at where we are in the world, and I think we're in a dark place. The unfortunate thing for me, and probably because my sentiments are old-fashioned, let's say in quotes, I'm of the escapist school, which is when I have entertainment, I kind of want to escape from what reality is and have a feeling like I'm in a different place, a happy place, a place that I want to be in. I've always felt that about movies. I've always felt, and I love a good drama. I love film noir. I love all that dark stuff. It's fun. But, me, I'm a very upbeat guy.
Yeah. And there's nothing fake about it either. That's who you are.
That's who I am. I'm generally, I'm very lucky. I feel very blessed because I'm just a happy person,
Yes.
I just feel great. I every day I've got so much to look forward to. And I love the fact that was kind of how I grew up. I always felt, God, I hope this doesn't stop, because I would be afraid as I got older and think to myself, when you stop having those carefree days of being a child and you have all these responsibilities, and you got to pay bills, and but I don't know, there's something that hit me as a young kid, but there's always, for me, every day is an optimistic experience. And I hope this doesn't upset the listeners and make them think, who is this moron? But it's really true. I'm genuinely there's so much to look forward to in life. I love life. I love living. And, I just have a great time. I find the humor in so much and find the happiness in so much things. So it really is natural for me to go to that route, as opposed to wanting to find this dark side and this angsty thing. I think we get too much into that, and unfortunately it puts people in a weird place.
Yeah.
I'm all about let's get out of that weird place and escape and have a good time.
And it's not as though you're ignoring what's going on around you.
No, on the contrary, I think I'm paying great attention to it and saying, look, we need this, right?
Well, a lot of people say that music is life. It brings something to life. And you and I have talked previously. Your last album is called Still Happy. It's happy music, as you put it. And I want to kind of turn the tables on the discussion.
Yeah.
Because you have said, I want people to feel better after hearing my music than they did before.
And these days, that's not too hard.
Yeah. And you mean that. You really want to make a positive impact. But I want to make this an introspective sort of question. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that you were very lucky as a kid. You were able to have this understanding that you're going to have a good outlook on the days ahead in life. But even for you, I'm sure there were those moments to where the days were not so good. For you, how did music provide an escape or provide a bit of encouragement to you in your own times like that?
It's a very broad subject, and I don't want people to think I'm approaching this from a naivete, but I know there are a lot of problems in the world, right? And everyone has elements of dark sides or depression or their problems, and some people, I feel very blessed. Let's just say this, I've been very blessed in my life to have supportive, loving parents, loving family, never really had to want for, and I know that there are a lot of people not in that situation. But with that being said, I've had my times where there were issues, dealing with certain issues that have put me in places where I felt down or really bad or sad. I mean, even dating and growing up and love life, you have your ups and downs and heartbreak. Heartbreak is kind of heartbreak, and so much of music, right? And the music we love deals with that kind of unrequited love or this heartbreak, and it's some stuff is so heavy, so deep. And they tell you, I always found this interesting because I had an acting teacher, wonderful woman. You'd know her from the film Grease. Remember Cha-Cha in the movie Grease? So this was Annette Cardona. She went by Annette Charles at the time, but she was terrific. And she used to have this theory that you're never really a good actor until you hit your mid-40s to 50s because you haven't lived life. And I always thought that was an interesting theory because, you haven't had the tragedies, let's say, that someone, by the time, if you're lucky, you have a pretty decent normal life, and that you don't start losing people really until much older. You don't experience the doldrums of having to do the 9 to 5 or make ends meet and struggle like you would for the most part until you hit that age, right? So I really, having the life that I had and being a happy kid has certainly informed the choices I've made artistically, I think, to go towards the fun, the comedy, the laughs, and a lot of people tell you comedians are the saddest people, but
Yes.
I don't know if that's always the case, and the kind of stuff I do is irreverent, it's fun-loving, but it comes from a positive, loving place, Whenever I was down or had these blue times, which people all do, if I could go to like a performer or put on a recording, let's say, listen to someone like Dizzy Gillespie, listen to somebody like Fats Waller, listen to someone like, Louis Armstrong, Louis Prima, that you cannot help but feel good and get a smile on your face. And I feel like, I knew just by watching film footage of these people, Louis Jordan, right, that they were having a great time.
Oh, yeah.
And because they were having so much fun doing this music, it was infectious. And I wanted nothing more than, in watching that footage, or watching Fred Astaire dance, watching Gene Kelly, watching the Nicholas brothers, I wanted so bad to be in that position, making the people happy, because I knew that when I would get a laugh in performance, or I would get a smile, or get that applause and that elation from an audience, that they've been moved, to me that's the greatest feeling in the world. So I'm always chasing that feeling. And I think that's where those moments growing up and feeling this height that you couldn't really explain, it was just this jubilation watching these performers like that and listening to these performers, or watching these films, these musicals from MGM, that elation, watching that and what those artistic achievements gave to me, that's really what informs what I do today and why I go for that.
And it's not only an education of the music that you're giving the audience, but you're making it relevant to their life, because that's the whole beauty of this music that you do.
That's why it's timeless.
That's right. Is you can take a song, Shaking the Blues Away, which we featured recently on Simply Timeless, an Irving Berlin song written 2 years before the Great Depression hit, 1927.
Right.
And when I picked that song out, I thought, I don't know if we're going through a Great Depression right now, but I'll be damned if those words and that music still doesn't apply very much today in 2019.
That's the thing that kind of saddens me, is that people don't give it. We're very quick in this country, in a sense, to be ageist, and it drives me crazy because I think you and I both have been people, just from what I gather in speaking with you the few times we've spoke, that really respect not just our elders, but where they've come from and what they have to offer and say. And I was always a kid who, that's probably why I was so close to my grandparents, or it kind of informed why I was so interested in speaking to older people and not just running out and ignoring them. I think it's very quick. It's easy to just, oh, yeah, that's the old babbling person in the corner, and let's just, something, you learn so much from talking to someone that's been through a lot. And to me, my love of history, I want to be right by that person. I don't care if they're the oldest person in the room. If they're the oldest person, I want to be by them and pick their brain and ask them about their experiences and find out what their life was like and what it was like living at a time that I'm so fascinated by. And I think it's so unfortunate that our society tends to pass over and really look down on the elderly and aging. It's such a normal process. So many cultures in this world revere the elderly, and for some reason we're so ageist in this country, and it's a terrible thing.
I was thinking, most of the gigs that I do are senior living facilities. And many of these people are in their early 80s. They still have plenty of life ahead. They just either are not able to handle all the cares for themselves and need help with that.
Sure.
Or they just wanted to live a good life and not have to worry about a lot of things.
Well, they just like the food. I'm kidding.
You know what? I have run into many communities. I'm like, this makes me look forward to getting old. But listen to this.
You just plaid shorts away, my friend.
Wait. Now there's a bad picture in my head. But think about this, Danny. You know, during our shows, I love to think of this as a conversation, you know, musical performance. It's a conversation. And after the shows, I hear so many stories. And I remember when I was a kid, and I'd go with my mom and dad and grandparents, and we'd go to see my grandmother's brother and her sister-in-law. And they would talk about all of these old stories from 1982. Now, these stories are just reminiscings, and frankly, I wasn't much interested in them. Maybe I should have been, I don't know. But now that I am a little bit older, I listen to these stories from these seniors in these retirement communities, and here's how I see it. Most of them have their families and friends that still come to see them. But what saddens me the most are those people. There's one lady at a community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Her son and daughter are near New York. They never come to see her. And I don't know if it's their intent, but I think of it this way. Here these people are with all of this life still to live, all of these stories. And yet people, they go to a home and they're forgotten. My question is this, you know, what good is a story if there's no one to hear it? It does no one any good to just have it all locked up inside here. So, I mean, let's face it, we're still young guys. You're 41, I'm almost 31. So we're a long way from that point. But should we ever, you know, get to that age in our 80s and 90s where people would then look up to us as the elders, I mean, think of the stories that we're going to share with them. I mean, you ever thought about that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I have a nephew who's just born in June, a niece who's a little over a year old, and I think about how much I look forward to when they're old enough, have them at some of the concerts I do, and, you know, talk to them about music and share with them the stuff I love. And I know my brother, Josh, you know, is a former comedy partner of mine, and did a lot of work together. He's excited about that, you know, and getting the kids interested in the older films, and you know, you impart what you know. I think that's the beautiful thing about passing on to generations. And it takes someone like yourself or myself or my brother, anyone into this era, and you have to pass on that love and that interest and hope that they take on. And they're not just spoon-fed by the media saying, you need to listen to this because you're this age and you have to do this. So, you know, we hope that we can impart some knowledge and the love we have for this era on to the next generation. And I'll tell you a nice story. You know, I help run an arts camp in Jersey City. And I really love doing it. I love working with children. And I do some outreach work where I bring arts integration into the schools. And a lot of times it's in Jersey City, and it's theater-based, it's music-based, but it's arts-based, and it's really wonderful. You know, we put on shows with these kids, and we do a lot of music every day. Starts with a sing-along. We do a lot of the classic tunes. You know, these kids are singing to some, you know, Nat King Cole and things like that. And it's wonderful because you get these little kids, ages 6 to like 12, under the, you know, 250 in this pavilion, all singing along.
I can just hear them now. Straighten up and fly.
It's exactly one of the songs we do with
That's awesome.
Rock and Rob and all this stuff, you know. And my brother and I will throw in some of these great old Irving Berlin tunes or Gershwin and stuff, and it's great. But I have this girl sitting next to me. She's 7 years old, just a darling girl, and I think she's going to be going places because she's just terrific and really great singer. She sits down and starts singing Stardust to me, with the verse, by the way, and then she's singing Violets for Your Furs. And I'm thinking, how the heck does a 7-year-old girl know this stuff? And then I think, what people must have thought about me when I was that age, sitting there playing the horn and listening to Benny Goodman and watching Laurel and Hardy and Charlie Chaplin and Danny Kaye and all these. So I think it's great that, there are these pockets of kids that will gravitate towards this classic music or these classic films and a whole era and culture from a different time. But there's a reason for that, right? Do I think people, maybe 40, 60 years from now, there's going to be little kids saying, remember that great music by Cardi B? I mean, hate to use her as one of the many examples.
I think in some regards, some of the artists do have a good bit of art to offer.
Yes.
And I'm thinking of people like, your Kelly Clarkson or Sam Smith.
Yeah,
they will be remembered for many years, but unfortunately, as you said, people don't remember these songs 3 weeks after they're released.
Well, can't you see that, you mentioned the repetition, and I listened to some of the music today and go, oh my God, this can't get any more monotonous, and it's just so simple. The message, there's not much thought behind it. It's very processed. It's very formulaic. And I don't know. I think people just they don't realize it. You go through a day, right? And how can you have a day without any kind of music? Even if you tried and didn't listen to any of your own music, and you didn't put on the radio in the car, if someone's driving by with a car and they got the music going, there's music. You hear it. You hear rhythm in life. There's rhythm in life. So it's really hard to get away from it. And there's so much music now. And even jazz. If you look at jazz has got so many subgenres that if you talk to the average person and tell them, I play jazz, they don't know what it means.
Right.
And they have this idea of what jazz is, and it's crazy. It's crazy because, jazz is so many things to so many people.
Yes.
I like to tell people the jazz that I do, which is certainly jazz. I'm an improvisational musician. It's what but it's a certain style. I like to tell people it's very accessible jazz. It's jazz that's accessible to not only jazz fans, but people that aren't necessarily fans of jazz.
Right.
And I think that jazz musicians have really a task right now to make sure that what we're doing is accessible to people. I mean, there's that old joke, and I always like to tell people, what's the difference between a rock guitarist and a jazz guitarist, right? Well, a rock guitarist plays 3 chords for 1,000 people, and a jazz guitarist plays 1,000 chords for 3 people. I mean, and as funny as that is, there's a truth to that.
Yes.
And I think our job as musicians, as jazz musicians, or people in this world, need to find that audience. And it's not so much about doing it just for what you like and for yourself, but it's a job to, really a call to action to find people that are going to be interested. And one of the things I love about Wynton Marsalis is he's such a great ambassador of the music, and he does so much to reach out to people in his programs, through education, and through their travel. He's really like someone that took over from where someone like, I think, Louis Armstrong,
Yes.
Was at. And I know there's a big generational gap between the two, but he not only appreciates and understands the history of the music, but he imparts that knowledge and that passion so beautifully that it's almost, if you're around him, you can't not get excited about it. And that's such a great thing. It's such an admirable quality. And I love that about Wynton. I love that about other people, like Barry Harris is somebody who does that and has this following of students to this day. And the guy's in his early 90s?
Once a week.
Once
At
a
least
week.
he does lessons.
And he's just terrific. And he's got that love. And he's a great educator. Being an educator is very important. It's why I love working with kids so much, is that, even though I'm not necessarily someone who takes on a lot of private students these days, there's still an element of what I do that educates, because I feel you really want to ignite an excitement or an interest or pique, curiosity in that younger generation. Otherwise it dies, right? So it's really kind of our goal. Stephen Sondheim talks about that, about how important education is, and he's gotten so much into education, even at his age,
Yeah.
with all his accomplishments. He talks about how important it is to be a teacher of this kind of art, this music, and so
There's an ongoing discussion with a lot of people these days. You have, obviously, this is a passing of the torch from one generation to the next. And I would say that we're in that next generation. basically anyone under the age of 50 who's still working. And there's a debate between the learning styles, the accessibility. Because for many years, as I talked with Alexa Tarantino about, with several others, for so many years, you didn't go to your middle school, you didn't go to a jazz camp, you didn't go to college. You had to learn it from listening, from a mentor.
And on the road, you learned on the gig.
And that still exists today. But what I want to ask you is someone who is in their early 40s, who did not come up on this music through traditional means. I mean, let's face it, you came up after a lot of the straight ahead and traditional jazz, that really boom had passed.
Sure.
So now you talk about children and those in grade school and in college. And they have so many distractions. They have so much technology in front of them. And you talk about education, sharing this music. I mean, unless the music finds them, I don't know if you ever really go in search of it. I think the music finds you, as supernatural as that might seem. But what I'm getting at...
That's the ideal situation.
But yet what I'm getting at is, how do you get this music in front of them? How do you make it accessible to them when there are so many other forms of music
being shoved in their face,
just vying for their attention? That's right.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think I could be wrong, because people do come to discover things later in life. I'm still finding discoveries of something I said, why didn't I know about this before? Oh, I like this, And I think that in life, right, we're always lifelong learners, but I think that the philosophy behind what this music is about and sort of the visceral reaction almost has to happen at such a young age.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you kind of lose someone to a different, more relevant, let's say in quotes, modern art form. And it often is the case that the kids that tend to gravitate towards this stuff are the kids that get into musical theater, theater kids, yeah. Right? Kids that are in music education. Then they get exposed to it because they'll have programs or curriculum that say, okay, we got to do an element of this history. Because I think even more frightening than the idea of this era of jazz kind of fizzling or losing popularity or losing its audience. Like, look at classical music. It's like you look at for example, look at the Grammys, right? Look at where jazz is in the Grammys these days. You probably don't even see, unless it's someone like Herbie Hancock, anything even being televised, because they get that stuff out of the way. And I heard stories years ago about Oscar Peterson at the Grammys given like a corner in a gymnasium to change, and they didn't even televise like him winning a Grammy. And these are stories I've heard from people on the inside that have been involved so many years. And it's like, well, why is that happening, right? And what can we do as artists to change that? And I think the thing that frightens me, and as much as I'm touting education and the importance of it, I also feel that jazz has become a business of education. It's become a college business of getting these students that have an interest and find this niche in jazz, which is a very small niche, I mean, what I do is accessible because I think it, the fact that I'm a singer helps that. If I was just an instrumentalist, it'd be harder. But you can relate to an audience. But you get these real serious musicians, and they're great players. They're what you call technical wizards through these programs. But then they go out and can't find work because there's not a real market for what they're doing.
Yes. And
they're turning out these, organizations are turning out these technically proficient wizards on their instruments or whatever, and then they don't find the work, so they go into teaching to then teach younger kids that grow up and turn into these technically proficient wizards, and then they can't find the work. So it's this cycle of education, and there's a real place for that. And I'm not saying anything down about it, but what I am saying is my concern is how are we winning over the audiences, You go to these concerts and it's the gray hair or the purple or blue hair. It's like whatever the color is that week and of the rinse. But the point is, they're dying off. But yet, my wife and I went to a Preservation Hall band concert, a couple of years back in the city, and the audience was 30-somethings going nuts like they're at a rock concert. So what are they doing, right? What are they doing right? What's interesting is their style is a very classic traditional jazz.
Yes, very.
And very accessible, therefore, I think.
In you and your career, and you released an album about a year or so ago, and hopefully another project on the way before too long.
On the burners, yeah.
What are you going to do to make this music accessible, to make it relevant, and to make it matter to the audience?
I'll tell you what, and this is something I think a lot of artists struggle with, and a lot of artists don't often zone in on, which is it seems so simple. But you must be true to yourself. And if you're 100% behind what you're doing, and you perform it that way, and give 120, 150% of yourself to that music, people are going to see that honesty, because audiences are smart. And they're going to buy it, and they're going to want it, because you're infectious. And that's what I work on every time. There's nothing I do that I don't feel I can get behind 100% and sell 100%.
Yeah.
And that really, that moves people, because people, they're smart. Audiences are smart. Kids are smart. Well, I can tell you right now, if I went up there and half-assed something, okay, the audience, whether they're kids, whether they're in their 90s, will read that. And they go, wait a minute, and they back off. But if you're committed 100% as an artist, I guarantee you that you're going to get people coming on board with what you do.
Final question. Why music?
I told you it was my fallback plan. No, yeah, but in honesty, it's because it's such a part of my life, and it brings such joy to me, and I feel that in doing what I do, I'm able to impart that joy in some way to other people. And how could you go wrong with music? It's just, it's life. Rhythm, jazz, it's life.
Danny Bacher, our in-studio guest this week. For more information on Danny's music and his tour schedule, visit the website Danny Bacher, that's Bacher, DannyBacherMusic.com. Until next time, I'm Jay Daniels, thanking you for joining us in studio.